Chris, what do you got for us?
All right. We're out of practice. So here are my 6 tips for getting back on stage. First, practice. You know, the old saying of rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. I don't care if you've been, singing in your basement or whatever you've been doing. If you haven't been in front of people, you're going to be pretty rusty. And so get the band back together. If you're a solo performer, run through your long sets, do it over and over and over. Get that stamina back. Second, make sure you test your gear because cables start to crackle and synthesizer knobs get dirty and strings break and stuff. And so make sure, plug everything in, run through your set with all your gear, make sure it's in working order. The other thing you should do is actually practice setting up your gear and tearing it down, because load in is another thing we're out of practice in. So you don't want to piss off the venues by taking forever and problem solving on the fly. Third, shake off the performance rust with a low risk performance. And what I mean by that is basically an open mic. This is what I did. I went to an open mic a couple weeks ago and I was like, this is the perfect place for me to suck. No one will care. It doesn't matter. I'm only playing 3 songs. If I'm really uncomfortable, I can bail after 1 song. So not that every artist can do an open mic in that way, but if there's some kind of like informal basement show, something like that, it's a good way to dip your toe in and get back in gear. Fourth, our physical health through this pandemic, for a lot of people, has gone to crap. We've eaten terrible food. We've been sedentary and not being as active. And then for singers, we haven't been singing as much. So there's a lot of ways in which our bodies might be failing us. So prepare for that and try to get back in shape, eat healthy again. Part of practicing is actually getting your voice back in shape. So if it doesn't work, if you try your best to get back in shape and you still kind of have a bad performance, that's okay. The 5th thing on my list is be kind to yourself. This pandemic has made us all live through something we never expected to live through. So don't expect to just be back to normal and 100%. Be kind to yourself. And last thing, because gigs might be sparse because there's so much competition for them, it might mean you're not playing nearly as much as you want to, but you have to stay ready. So I would say schedule your weekly or however often you need to practice to just always be on your game. Make sure you're doing that regardless of whether you have gigs on the books or not, because as we said earlier, there might be a lot of last minute gig opportunities.
Lots of great stuff there. I started laughing when you said the thing about even loading in, because I have been there so many times. Been there a few times myself, but when I've been playing with somebody and they show up and clearly they were at home and just took all their gear and haphazardly just threw it in stuff. And then they get to the stage and like dump it out on the stage. And you're like,
the cables are all twisted up like
and you're like,
a bag of snakes.
And they're just drifting around trying to figure out what to do, like they've never played on stage before. And I'm not talking about people that haven't played on stage before. I'm talking about like it's been a while and you're like, oh, how do I connect this and what goes where? And it's like,
oh, God forbid you have to also bring your own PA. I mean, that's
yeah. And if it's the opening band or that you're waiting to line checks or the band before you or whatever, you're like, oh my gosh, please. So yes, I mean, some of that people would say, oh, whatever, but no, go test your gear. My pedal board has been sitting here behind me here at home, not going anywhere. And when I started taking it places, it's like the cables are cracking. I'm like, this has been sitting right here doing nothing. Why are cables going out? It's
the same thing that's happening to our bodies. When we don't use them, they fall apart. It's like, no, I should be in good shape. I haven't used it.
But I like what you're saying about be ready, because I think we are going to be in a situation where there are still a lot of cancellations happening for various things, whether, hey, things may be open, but a band member from the band that was supposed to play tested positive for COVID, or the gas prices are out of control. So a band decided that they can't make the show, or there's just a number of reasons why, as people are starting to gear back up, things could not work out and there be open slots and last minute gigs. So I think that's really great. And I like what you said about shake off the rust with a low risk performance, because that's something that every time you get out of the habit of doing something, especially performing, you realize, whoa, this is far more physical than I remembered. This takes a lot more out of me. And sure, I could just stand up there and play an uninspired gig, but to really get back in the mode of like, I'm on stage, I need to really engage these people and put together a set that's gonna create fans. It takes some, you know, getting back on the treadmill, making sure you're in shape,
Yeah, well, when I played
both
that
both metaphorically and physically.
when I played that open mic, I had a lot of realizations in that 9 minutes or whatever it was. One of them was, uh, that remembering that feeling of what it's like to set up in front of an audience. Like, not every gig you're gonna be behind curtains that close, and you get the privilege of setting up 5 hours before the gig and stuff. So this was one of those moments where I'm rushing on stage, setting up my gear in front of people, and there's this weird bit of adrenaline that happens where I'm not thinking fully clearly, or I'm not being as careful as I should be. And an example of that is I need my keyboard to be at this height if my chair or whatever is at this height. You get used to your performance position. And if you're rushing, you make these little concessions of like, crap, I got to play. All right, the keyboard's too low, but whatever, I'll deal with it. And then during your set, you realize all the muscle memory is kind of out of whack, and then you're like, oh, my adrenaline got the best of me. I should have taken, and that's just one little thing. I was also dealing with realizing my vocal range is a little bit less than it was, and my memory for songs and chord changes. It was all rusty. And thankfully, everyone was like, that was great. So I fooled everyone. But internally, I felt like fairly stressed about literally everything. So I was glad it was an open mic, and hopefully that prepares me for when I have an actual serious gig to just go a little slower, be more
Yeah.
prepared.
Well, and the one thing that I'll say a lot about touring and playing shows and why it's so important to really practice, but actually practice how you plan to perform, because so much of when you're on stage isn't about remembering the songs. It's like dealing with all the elements around you, the cable going out, the sound not sounding like it did at sound check, the person on the front row being really distracting. There's so much mental stuff coming at you that's beyond just being able to play well, that it's like getting back in that mode of like, oh yeah, part of the the getting back on stage is being prepared to play while dealing with all these other external forces that don't happen in my rehearsal space.
Yeah, and it's hard to account for the vibe in the room until you're on stage. And then sometimes if you're not in your best shape as a performer, the vibe in the room suddenly sets the tone for your own performance and emotions, as opposed to your performance changing the vibe in the room, which is kind of like you sync to their level as opposed to like lifting them up to yours. Yeah.
All right. Well, if you're getting back on stage and going through some processes and doing things, we want to hear about it. You can call our listener line at 360-524-2209, or you can email us at podcast@cdbabypodcast.com. We want to hear, what are you doing to prepare? Are you heading on the road? Have you been playing shows? Again, it could be different scenarios wherever you are in the world. Some people, it's been game on this whole time. Most of us, it hasn't. But yeah, let us know. And if you've got advice for other artists, what you went through, what helped, what didn't, or maybe it was a total disaster. We love those stories too.